Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. You can tell from the title up there. It's time for another movie review, and this is the 2024 slasher film directed by Damien Leone and the sequel to his previous two entries in this series. This, of course, is Terrifier 3, and as the advertisement made it clear, it is a Christmas-themed slasher. Or at least I should say, it's set around Christmas, so there's a lot of Christmas imagery in it. Now, last year, as of when I'm recording this, I reviewed the first two films. First one I liked okay. Second one I did like a lot more, and that feeling did grow when I actually went to the Frida Cinema and watched it during its re-release last year. Now, part of the reason I went was not only to watch the film in theaters, because I was kicking myself a little bit for not seeing it, but was also to watch the sneak peek at Terrifier 3. And that sneak peek showed that it was going to be Christmas themed and Art was going to be dressed as Santa. And there is a decent part of the film where he is dressed up as Santa. Now, I'll probably have to watch the films in close proximity, but this film is a little bit of a downward from from the second film as a whole, except for one regard, and that is the over-the-top nature of the kills. And that's because they have more money to work with. If I remember correctly, the budget for the second film was under $500,000. I think it was a little over $250,000, which, that's a low budget film by modern standards, even before you take like salaries and all that. But you could still see that a good portion of that money was up on the screen. This one has had a budget of about $2 million. And when it comes to the production value, you can see a lot of that up on the screen, especially with the kills. So that money is money well spent, and I'll say with the over-the-top nature of these kills, which I'll talk a little bit about there. Now, it's just that the plot, if you did not care about the characters in the second film, or slasher films, you just don't care about the characters, this is going to go with that. With me, it's just that a couple of the legacy characters from the previous one of them, he's kind of wasted other than a couple scenes. But the Sienna storyline, I actually did like it. And that's mainly because I like when they show the characters that are involved in multiple films, or even if it's just the aftermath, that they really are suffering from PTSD. And I do like that. Now, I know not everyone's going to go that route with it, or at least to this extreme level. I mean, as we've seen in other slasher films, but Sienna, due to her age and the extremeness of it, I can see her having this level of it. But I'm skipping ahead a little bit of it. Now, the film does open with probably going to be one of the most controversial scenes in the movie for some people. Other ones might say it's polarizing. That is, of course, Art sneaking into the house dressed as Santa and basically massacring an entire family. I say basically because there's an implication that maybe he leaves one survivor, or maybe he kills the last person off screen. But it also balances the horrific nature of Art's kills with the dark humor. And some of it's only dark because of the subject matter. Like, you see a clown dressed as Santa killing people violently with an axe, and then it goes to him dipping Christmas cookies into milk and eating them in such a jolly manner. Yeah, some might say that's tone whiplash, but I'd say that dark humor really fits the dark, over-the-top nature of this series. Now, after this opening scene, we jump back 5 years, and it shows what happened after the end of the previous film. The whole thing involving the head. We see that Art's body was still technically alive, because that was one thing I was wondering. Like, okay, they decapitated him. Well, you see the head birth. How are they going to continue on this? It looks like the head was revived due to Art's connection with his previous victim, Victoria. The head makes its way to the asylum, and it kills everyone, including Chris Jericho. Jericho returned for this. And with how he was killed, it's kind of... There's a little bit of funny irony in the fact that a wrestler that is a notorious shit talker gets killed by his mouth and that area around his head getting torn out. I know they probably did that intentionally. It's a nice little way there. That makes me also wonder when Jericho filmed this one. Makes me wonder if he filmed like some of his scenes about the same time, or he came back, because he looks more or less the same as he did in the previous one. And I know in his wrestling career he's had a little bit of body changes since when he probably filmed the scenes for Terrifier 2 till now, but could be the lighting and all that. Of course, it's a weird looking security guard when it comes to uniform, and actually not getting in trouble for falling asleep on the job. Now, Victoria and Art escape, and they make their way to an abandoned house, and they sit there. And as we find out later, they sat there for 5 years. So it's the whole dormancy thing that we see when we go from one slasher sequel to another, where there's that thing. Sometimes it's the killer revives himself from his previous defeat. Other times it just jumps randomly. Here we actually see Art and Victoria go into dormancy. And of course they get woken up by people going to go demolish the house, and of course they both get killed. And now Art is wandering around the city. Victoria is a little bit too, but she's mainly at the house. Art wanders around, and he ends up in a bar, and this is where we get the Santa impersonator. And Art, of course, you get that really jovial nature of his, this contrasted by his murderous spree. And he ends up peeing on the Santa, and then he ends up killing everyone in the bar. Now, the thing that I loved about this is that he pulled a gun out of his sack. So Art the Clown is packing. And he doesn't kill Santa with a gun, though. He kills him in a way that I'm like, okay, that is very vicious. He kills him with essentially what I would call a liquid nitrogen fire extinguisher. And a hammer. And it's like, ooh, that's gotta hurt. And of course, not only does Art acquire the Santa outfit, this is also where he gets that beard, because I was kind of wondering about that, because when I saw one of the screenshots, I'm like, that looks like there's blood around the beard. Where did he get it from? Well, now we know. He killed that Santa and got it. And of course, this whole bar scene is where we get a Cliff Howard cameo, which the crowd I saw it with at the Frida Cinema is primarily horror fans. So the moment we saw him, we were all like, yeah, Cliff. And speaking of which, the other scene that'll probably get some people going, oh, who think about the children, is of course the scene with Art dressed as Santa at the mall, where children are going to get their photos taken with Santa. Now, I was worried he was actually going to kill Santa and then take his place, but nope. He just sneaks in there on the break and gives gifts to children. Then he gets kicked out by security. And then, I love when horror series actually do this. Art has no qualms about killing kids. I mean, we kind of saw that in the previous one when he attacked the little brother, but here it shows he has no qualms killing kids. And of course, we saw that in the opening scene, but here, bombs away. That's all I'm going to say about it. And in the aftermath of that, we get a Tom Savini cameo, which of course everyone's like, oh yeah. Now, while Art is doing all this, it's jumping back and forth between him and Sienna, which she's released from a mental hospital, and she's living with her extended family. She's living with her aunt and uncle. The aunt is the sister of her mother, and her cousin Gabby, a younger cousin who idolizes her. Now, her uncle's a little hesitant to have her move in because of everything, but, you know, the whole family thing, they're going to try to help her move on. Of course, she's on medication because of everything she's dealt with. Now, part of it looks like, is that she's also had some hallucinations about seeing Art that we kind of get from the dialogue, which makes sense given everything she went through in the previous film. Not only all the trauma with fighting Art, but the fact that she more or less died and resurrected herself, which that whole Messiah imagery actually continues into this film. And she's still reeling with it, like, oh no, he's not fully gone. Now, that type of thing we've seen in other protagonists. I mean, we saw it with Tommy Jarvis. We saw a little bit with Nancy Thompson, a little bit. We saw it a little bit more with Nancy's successors in the following Nightmare films, or at least being prepared in case he did come back. So this is not new ground. It's just the way they're going at it. It's more towards the psychiatric way, which I know Nightmare also did something like that with 3, but it was a different angle. Here, it's her trying to maintain her sanity and go back to some form of normalcy, but I love the way that Sienna's actress plays this stuff. It's like, what exactly is normal after something like this? And of course, seeing the visions of Art dressed as Santa and everything going around doesn't help anything, but it makes everyone around her feel like she's having a psychotic break. Which, of course, is not helped when, in the process of bringing her brother over for Christmas, Art and Victoria crash the party. And of course, following this, in between this, is the scene that leaked onto YouTube, apparently, and that is the shower murder scene. Which, that one, I'm like, okay, this is going to go somewhere. And it's like, ooh, yee, vicious. And that is definitely one of the scenes where you can tell that money went somewhere. Including, while watching it, I was like, okay, are they going to really go this route with this murder? I mean, he's on this thing. Yep. Chainsaw to the ass. And to the knob. And yes, we do see that. I'm going to say it's very, very visceral and gory with this. If you're not a fan of gore in your horror films, you're probably not going to like this one. But again, if you've already watched the first two and you're at this point watching it, you already know what you're in for with this. Now, the ending of the film, Sienna, of course, is confronting Art a bit more, but it's a little bit more on Art's terms this time, considering that instead of confronting him like more or less on even grounds in a funhouse ride called Terrifier like in the previous film, she and her family are at Art and Victoria's mercy. And of course, like I mentioned, the whole thing with more of the Messiah allegory, I mean, they put a crown of thorns on Sienna's head. That should tell you. Of course, she does get the sword back, and there's a little fight there. And I'm not going to give all the details here, but part of this is Damien Leone adding a little bit more lore to this series. Because the previous two films, it's made it clear that there is something supernatural about Art, but it's never clarified what. And there was like little hints that whatever it was is why Victoria was messed up. Here they go a little bit more into it. And part of it is demons trying to enter the real world. They do it through a conduit, so it's like they're familiar to book passage. And it's usually a very vile person. And in whatever demon this is case, they picked Art the Clown. Now, apparently, when he was killed, the demon moved from him to Victoria. And of course it's still resurrecting Art to do its bidding, but it's now in Victoria. And so when Victoria's talking, that's not fully her. That's whatever demon that is possessing Art and her talking. And now, of course, that demon's going to try to still come through the real world. But when there is a darkness, there has to be a light that rises to meet it. As we saw in the previous film, right now that light is Sienna, and she still is that light in this film. And Sienna realizes that a bit more here. Now they don't really go full on deep into it, which I'm going to say they'll probably elaborate a little bit more on that in the next film, because yes, this film does end on a cliffhanger that is very, very sequel baity. Now the previous two films did have endings that implied that there could be more so the second one from what I remember. I mean the whole birth head thing, but that could have just been an ending to be an ending, you know, just a shock. I mean, the original Nightmare on Elm Street had a very ending like that, but it didn't really mean they were going to make sequels. It's just, with what they did afterwards, you can kind of interpret it as it, but if you look at it as a standalone film, it doesn't really mean anything. Now this one, if this is the end of the line, it's a very downbeat ending, but we all know, especially with how Damien is with this series, that there's going to be at least one more. There'll probably be more than that, but at least one more in order to wrap up this part of the story. Because they could always bring Art and all that back for it, because we all know when it comes to slasher films, evil is never really fully defeated. But then again, with other slasher films, it's been all about the money. With this one being more Damien's thing, it's going to be limited by his creativity and the money he's able to raise. Now, get back on my point with that. Sienna, the whole point I was making about Sienna and them. Sienna is that light. She does rise to meet it. And she does win, if you can call it that, because it's very bittersweet, because Gabby is taken essentially to hell. I know this is a spoiler, but I have to address this in order to address the fact this is an open ending. And now, as I was watching this in the theater, I was wondering, like, this film feels like we're getting near the time marker, so I don't think we're going to have a wrapped up thing. And this is the second time in the last couple years watching a film where I felt that. The other one was, of course, Across the Spider-Verse. And then, of course, with that one I remembered, oh yeah, there's a third one for a trilogy. With this one, I'm like, oh yeah, I know he was probably thinking about a fourth one, so this definitely shows he was thinking about that ahead of time while writing this one. Now, of course, Sienna now. Gabby is the only person Sienna has left at this point. I'm not going to give any spoilers for why, but one of them, of course, is the fact her brother's gone. They don't show anything in flashback, but it's pretty clear what Art and Victoria did to him based on what we see. But it's one of those things of like, oh, Jonathan, poor Jonathan. We don't really see a lot of him. I mean, there's a couple of scenes of him at the school, him talking with his roommate and his roommate's girlfriend, who's big into the Art the Clown thing, which I'll get to that in a second. Sienna, she's vowing to go find Gabby, which means she has to find a way to get to hell to rescue her, so depending on how they want to do that, the next film they're going to probably have to raise a little bit more money. Unless they just do weird little set things for hell. I mean, it's possible. They got to be very creative with it. And of course, Victoria, more or less gone at this point because she's been decapitated, and her body basically is what opened the portal to hell. Art gets away, gets out into the cold, and he gets on a bus. Which, just the fact of Art the Clown waiting for a bus and getting on the bus, that really was a good way for him to end the film. We know there's going to be one more showdown between Sienna and Art. What I love, though, about this is that they do an Art the Clown Christmas version of a Christmas song. It's a clown named Art. First time I heard that, I'm like, oh, that is so delectably dark and funny. I love it. And of course, it plays in the credits too, so you gotta give it that. Now, by this point in the film, Art's no longer in his Santa suit, so he's not getting on the bus in the Santa suit. Now, circle back around to Jonathan's thing, since I brought it up. He is dealing with the aftermath of this stuff too. He's also medicated. But it seems like he's trying to just push all the memories of everything and just believe it was some type of hallucination, or just trying to forget everything. And the film only touches on this a little bit when Jonathan watches a little video podcast that two people are doing talking about the case, and that is that some people seem to think that Sienna is a murderer, and of course, given that they probably found her at the scene of the crime, I can see why. Especially since Art's body disappeared. Some people are like, oh, the body conveniently disappeared and all that fun stuff. Yeah, there's no other body, but there wasn't a clown. So people thinking she's the killer, you can kind of see why they would do that. And the fact that they were found at the scene of the crime with no other body is probably the other reason why Sienna was in the mental hospital with probably whatever she was spouting off screen. They never specify what, but we could kind of piece it together by what we saw in the previous film, how we see her in this film, and also how we see Jonathan. Now, with the few scenes Jonathan's in, his actor does an alright job. It's not as interesting as the previous film. But to see him go away from what he was into in the previous film to how he is here, given what he what he lived through, it makes sense. It's just that it kind of sucks we don't see him and the uncle getting grabbed on screen. It's implied. I mean, because we see the uncle on the phone, and we hear like a little weird thing, and the moment I heard that, I'm like, oh no. Now, I thought it was just going to be Art and Victoria impersonating Jonathan. I didn't think it was going to be like this. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, poor him. Well, that's a waste of his character and all that, but I'll say it is a little bit of gore. It is some nice little subtle gore. That's all I'm going to say about that. The music for this film, excellent. And it is done by Paul Wiley. does a pretty good job with it. Definitely fits the tone of it, and of course, like I said about the Christmas song. The cinematography is George Stuber? Steuber? Is that his last name spelled? From, hope I'm pronouncing that right. And of course, when combined with Leon's direction, perfect. It works perfectly. Just the color saturation is all perfect. That's a little bit brighter than the previous one at points, but I think that kind of goes with the whole Christmas thing. And of course, the acting, it's what you would expect in this. No one here is going to be winning Oscars, as I say a lot of times with certain horror films, but it does fit it. Like Lauren Lavera as Sienna, definitely believable for someone who's been through that crap that she was in. Elliot and does it all right. Rest of the cast does a good job. Let's see. I'm looking for Gabby's on here, because Gabby's with kid actors, it usually can be take it or leave them. But Gabby's actress, which I'm looking through her, I'm looking. Antonia Rose. Or I'm gonna probably guess the Americanization would be Antonella, Antonella. You guys know I suck sometimes with name pronunciation, so I'm just gonna call by her last name, Rose, as Gabby. She was pretty good. Definitely believed her as the younger cousin who idolizes her older cousin. And of course, the fact they make her a snoop when it comes to Christmas presents does tie back in. So it's a whole little thing like that where it's a you don't bring up something and not have it pay off later. And then of course, David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown. He's wonderful as always. His physical acting. And of course, here it ties a little bit more into some of the humor. Not only the dark humor, but some of the actual humor. Like Art overhearing the roommate and girlfriend talking about the whole thing and making comments on him, and him reacting like about the smell. And he's like, stuff like that. The audience I was with was rolling, and that's definitely one good thing I say about the theater experience with this film, even if I did not really like it. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't like it. I liked it, but let's just say if I was like, with it, the theater experience alone would have made it a little bit better to watch. And that was because it was a pretty packed house full of primarily horror fans. And that's always something you want when you're going into a horror film, especially if you already know what type of film you're going into. Now, I am looking forward to when they do the sequel to this, because we all know it's going to have to happen. A couple months ago, Damien actually confirmed it, but when and where, no idea. I'd say probably another couple years. But we'll see, because this one he shot at the beginning of this year, and he already got it done and released this year, so who knows, maybe he already has the script in hand, maybe he's writing it, and maybe next year we'll get a repeat. But I'll say though is with these films, I hope he starts taking his time a little bit more with them after this point, because if he keeps doing Terrifier films after 4, I don't want this series to end up doing what a lot of other ones do, where they come out too quickly and then the quality drops off, especially the story quality. If you enjoyed the first 2 films, or about the first one and like the second one, or vice versa, if you like any of them, I definitely say watch this one. I mean, if you can get to a theater that's going to probably be focused more by horror buffs, I would do that. But if you got to go to a general one just to see it, I would do it. And of course, now I really need to get up off my ash and actually buy a copy of the second one, and then of course once this one, get a copy of that. And of course, now I really need to go talk with Damien and Art himself, David, at a horror con next time they go. I wasn't able to afford it for this last one that they were at, but definitely next year, because I know they're going to be at one next year. I definitely got to splurge for it. And that's really all I'll talk about with this one. I'm sorry if my energy's a little low with this one. I've been up over 12 hours as I'm recording this, and it's almost 11 here. So, till next time, everybody.